It started with a growl at the dinner table. Within minutes, a retired canine revealed the bottle in a child's hand was more deadly than any gun. The house was quiet, except for the soft clatter of forks against plates and the hum of the old refrigerator in the corner. Claire Hayes sat across from her 3-year-old son Noah, watching him kick his small legs beneath the table, while he giggled at nothing in particular. It was a rare, peaceful evening, the kind she had come to cherish after long shifts at the precinct. Beside the boy sat Titan, her retired canine partner, a scarred German shepherd with ears that never seemed to relax and amber eyes that missed nothing. He had been her shadow through years of service, through raids and night patrols, through silence and screams, and even now in retirement, he carried himself like a soldier waiting for the next order. Noah adored him, often tugging at his ears or leaning against him as if he were a living pillow. Titan never minded. He was gentle with the boy in a way that never failed to soften Claire's heart. Tonight, however, something shifted. Noah raised his bottle of warm milk to his lips, and Titan's head snapped up with sudden sharpness. His ears pricked forward, his body stiffened, and a low growl rumbled from his chest. Claire's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Titan had growled before, but always at something clear. A knock on the door, a stranger too close, a rustle in the yard. This was different. His gaze was locked not on the window or the dark beyond it, but on the bottle in Noah's small hands. "No," Claire whispered almost to herself. She reached out, steady but tense, watching the dog's body vibrate with warning. Noah giggled again and tilted the bottle further, unaware of the tension coiling around him. Titan's growl deepened, and he rose slowly, his paws silent against the wood floor. His eyes never left the bottle. Claire felt her stomach twist. She had trusted this dog with her life in alleys and in shootouts, and he had never once been wrong. His instincts had saved her more than once, and the certainty in his posture now sent a shiver down her spine. She pushed her chair back carefully, trying not to startle Noah, but Titan moved first. With a sudden lunge, he knocked into the boy's hand, the bottle tumbling from his grip and spilling across the table. Milk spread in pale rivers, dripping to the floor, but Titan didn't stop. He pressed a paw against the bottle, pinning it down. His lips peeled back as he growled louder. "Noah," Claire said quickly, her voice sharp. "Come to me." The boy blinked at her, startled, but obeyed, sliding off his chair and running into her arms. She held him close, her eyes locked on Titan, who now pawed at the bottle as if trying to tear it apart. The smell of warm milk filled the air, but beneath it, Claire noticed something else, faint but bitter. A sharp chemical tang that did not belong. Her pulse quickened. Titan looked at her, then back at the bottle, and barked once short and urgent. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She knew with a sinking certainty that her dog had just told her the truth. Something was very wrong with what her child had been drinking. The bottle slipped from Noah's little fingers just as Titan lunged, his powerful head knocking it away before the child could raise it again. The plastic clattered against the edge of the table and rolled across the wood, spilling milk in wide streaks that dripped onto the floor. For a moment, everything seemed frozen, the sound of the splash echoing in Claire's ears, Noah's startled cry rising above it, and Titan's deep growl vibrating through the room. The German shepherd stood over the fallen bottle, his hackles raised, his teeth bared as though the thing on the floor were not harmless plastic but a snake ready to strike. Claire's heart hammered as she scooped Noah into her arms. He buried his face in her shoulder, frightened by Titan's sudden violence, but Claire couldn't bring herself to scold the dog. She had seen him charge suspects, sniff out hidden weapons, and drag her to safety more than once. He did not act without reason. Now his paws scraped against the linoleum, claws scratching as he batted the bottle back and forth, his nose pressed close to it, his growl unrelenting. Claire crouched low, holding Noah tightly, her eyes locked on the dog. Milk pooled around the bottle and spread beneath the table legs, But Titan ignored the mess. He sniffed the bottle's nipple, then jerked his head back and barked sharply. Claire caught a whiff of something sharp that cut through the sweetness of the dairy. She leaned closer, her nose wrinkling. It wasn't just spoiled milk. The smell reminded her of the evidence locker at the station. The faint sting of chemicals used in narcotics or sedatives. "No," she whispered, her mouth going dry. She reached for the bottle, but Titan snapped his jaws an inch from her hand, not biting but warning. His amber eyes burned into hers, pleading and commanding all at once. "Do not touch. Do not trust." Claire froze, then pulled her hand back slowly. Noah squirmed in her arms, whimpering. "Mommy, Titan's bad." Claire shook her head, kissing the top of his hair. "No, sweetheart. Titan's trying to help." She kept her voice calm, though her stomach churned. She watched the white puddle of milk creep toward her shoes, and suddenly wanted to gag. What had she almost let her son drink? Titan lowered his head again and began pawing harder, batting the bottle toward Claire like he wanted her to see. His growl softened into a low whine. Claire set Noah down on a chair and carefully slid forward, with a napkin in hand, wrapping it around the bottle without letting her skin touch the plastic. The closer it came to her nose, the stronger the acrid odor grew until she had no doubt left. There was something inside it that had nothing to do with milk. Her hands shook as she placed the bottle inside a plastic grocery bag from the counter, tying it tight. Titan finally stepped back, his tail stiff, his eyes never leaving the bag. Claire gathered Noah close again, pressing him against her chest, feeling his tiny heartbeat racing against her own. The warm safety of dinner had been replaced by the cold certainty of danger. Titan had stopped her son from drinking something that might have stolen him away forever. Claire drove through the dark streets with one hand tight on the wheel, and the other gripping the sealed bag that held the bottle. The grocery bag crinkled against the passenger seat every time she turned, the sound far too loud in the silence of the car. Noah had fallen asleep in his car seat, his head tilted to the side, thumb in his mouth, unaware of the storm unraveling around him. Titan sat alert in the back, his eyes fixed on the bag, his body tense as if the danger was still alive inside it. Claire pressed harder on the accelerator, her pulse keeping time with the hum of the engine. She had seen plenty of evil in her years on the force, but never had it reached across her own table and into her own child's hands. By the time she pulled into the precinct parking lot, her stomach was knotted. She scooped Noah into her arms, his small body limp with sleep, and carried him inside with Titan at her heels. The night shift officers glanced up, surprised to see their colleague storming in with her dog and child. Claire offered no explanation, only a sharp nod as she hurried down the hallway to the forensics lab. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, giving the room a sterile chill. Claire handed Noah to a trusted officer, who promised to sit with him in the break room, then set the bagged bottle on the metal counter. Forensic tech Marissa Kent, a woman Claire trusted with her life, raised an eyebrow but asked no questions. She slid on gloves and opened the bag carefully, her trained eyes narrowing as she inspected the bottle. Titan stayed glued to Claire's side, growling softly, until Marissa promised she would handle it gently. The first swabs and quick chemical strips were enough to make Marissa's expression harden. She frowned, double-checked the reading, then looked at Claire with grim certainty. "It's not just spoiled," she said quietly. "This milk is laced with something." She tapped the chart. "A sedative. Fast-acting, almost undetectable. It's used in hospitals, in small doses, but here, it's concentrated." Claire's chest felt like it caved in. Her voice came out as a whisper. "What kind of sedative?" Marissa hesitated. "Ketazolam, colorless, tasteless. Children would fall asleep within minutes, unresponsive, but breathing. To anyone else it would look like a kid just dozed off." She swallowed, her tone heavy. "This is the kind of thing traffickers use. Keeps kids quiet, easy to move, no fuss." Claire gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. The words slammed into her like bullets. Someone had put this in her son's bottle, had planned to take him from her home, from her arms, from his life. Titan let out a sharp bark, the sound cutting through her spinning thoughts. His amber eyes locked on hers, steady and certain. Her blood ran cold. The faceless evil she had fought on duty had stepped into her kitchen. Someone had targeted her son. Titan had saved Noah tonight, but the thought clawed at her mind. What if he hadn't? Claire sat in the break room long after the test results were handed to her. Noah curled up asleep on the couch beside her, Titan stretched out at her feet, with his head resting on his paws. She stared at the vending machine across the room without really seeing it, her mind pulling at the threads of the day, trying to find where the danger had slipped in. She had locked the doors. She had checked the windows. She had lived as carefully as any mother who wore a badge and carried scars from the job. Still, someone had managed to poison her child's bottle. The thought gnawed at her like rust working through steel. She replayed the hours before dinner, every moment, every visitor, every detail. That was when a memory rose like smoke. Mrs. Dalton, the neighbor who had moved in 2 weeks ago, all smiles and warmth. The kind of woman who baked cookies on the first day and offered help before you could ask. Claire had felt a small tug of unease then, but ignored it, telling herself she was just being suspicious. Titan, however, had not ignored it. The old shepherd had growled each time Mrs. Dalton stepped into the house, not loud enough to cause a scene, but steady, low, a warning wrapped in fur. Claire had brushed it off, embarrassed by his behavior, but now the memory settled heavy in her chest. She remembered Mrs. Dalton's words earlier that afternoon. "You work so hard, Claire. You should let me take Noah for a few hours sometime. Give yourself a break." She had smiled wide, her hand brushing Noah's hair in a way that made him shrink back just a little. Claire had forced a polite laugh, had said maybe one day, had told herself she was overthinking. Titan had risen from his spot by the door, placing himself between Noah and the neighbor without being called. His eyes had followed the woman until she left, and when the door closed he had stayed there for a long time, nose pressed against the crack, as though her scent lingered like smoke. Now the unease sharpened into dread. Mrs. Dalton had seemed helpful, but what did Claire really know about her? Nothing beyond the name she gave, the friendly words, the ready smile. No history, no family, no record of where she came from. And Titan, who had trusted men with guns and women in tears, who had walked through fire and rubble without a sound, had growled at her every single time. Claire's stomach twisted as she looked down at her son, his small chest rising and falling in sleep. He had been so close to swallowing that poison, so close to being carried away into the night. She thought of Mrs. Dalton's soft voice, her promise that she could help, and felt her jaw clench. Helpful neighbors did not leave chemical sedatives in milk bottles. Helpful neighbors did not make a battle-scarred dog stand guard in his own home. Claire reached down and rested a hand on Titan's head. His ears flicked, his eyes opening to meet hers, steady and knowing. "You were right," she whispered. "I should have listened." The dog gave a quiet huff and pressed his head into her palm. For the first time in years, Claire felt fear not for the dangers out there in the streets, but for the one that had already slipped across her fence. The house was dark and still, the kind of quiet that should have been comforting after the storm of the day. Yet Claire felt no peace. Every creak of the old floorboards, every whisper of wind against the windows made her heart race. She had tucked Noah into his crib hours earlier, brushing his hair from his forehead and listening to his soft breathing as if it were the only thing keeping her sane. Titan lay nearby, stretched across the doorway of the nursery like a living barricade, his eyes half closed but his ears twitching at every sound. Sometime after midnight, Titan stirred. His head snapped up, and a low growl rumbled from his chest. Claire had been dozing in the chair by the crib, but the sound pulled her awake instantly. She followed his gaze, expecting him to be watching the window or the door, but instead his eyes were fixed on the wall. He rose slowly, his paws silent on the floorboards, and padded toward the air vent above the baseboard. His body stiffened as he pressed his nose against the slats. And then he barked, sharp and furious. Claire's blood chilled. She hurried over and pulled him back, trying to see what had him so alarmed. It looked like an ordinary vent, the kind that had blown warm air through the house since she had moved in. But Titan barked again, pawing at the metal cover with desperate urgency. His claws scraped against the paint until Claire's hands shook too much to ignore him. She grabbed a screwdriver from the drawer and knelt down. Her fingers trembled as she worked the screws loose, all the while Titan pacing behind her, growling and whining as if urging her on. When the cover finally came free, Claire leaned closer, shining the light from her phone into the dark cavity. At first, she saw only dust and shadows. Then the light hit something smooth and reflective. Her breath caught in her throat. A small black lens stared back at her from the vent, the glass catching the beam like an unblinking eye. Her stomach twisted so hard she thought she might be sick. She reached in with careful hands and pulled the device free. It was no ordinary piece of house equipment. Wires, a transmitter, a tiny battery pack. Someone had planted a hidden camera in her baby's room. She sank back onto her heels, the weight of the truth pressing down on her like a stone. The drugged bottle had not been an accident. It was part of a plan, and someone had been watching long enough to know her routines, her child's habits, every vulnerable moment. Titan stood close, his nose brushing the camera as he growled low, his amber eyes reflecting the same fury burning in her chest. Claire cradled Noah closer, whispering into the silence even as her voice shook. "They've been in my house." The thought was unbearable, yet there was no denying it. The danger had not just slipped across her fence, it had already crossed her threshold, leaving behind eyes in the walls and poison in her son's bottle. Claire sat at her desk long after the sun rose, the glow of the computer screen casting pale light across the scattered files and half-empty coffee cups. Noah was at the precinct daycare, safe under watchful eyes, and Titan lay stretched at her feet, ears flicking each time she shifted in her chair. The hidden camera was locked away in evidence, the poisoned bottle already tagged for federal review, yet none of that stopped the pounding in her chest. She needed answers, and she needed them fast. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she ran background checks on her neighbor, the woman who had smiled so kindly and called herself Mrs. Dalton. At first the results were clean, almost too clean. The driver's license was newly issued, the credit history barely a year old, the rental agreement filled out in a hand that seemed practiced but unsteady. Claire narrowed her eyes. People didn't just appear with spotless records unless they had something to hide. She pushed deeper, requesting fingerprint data from the station archives. Hours later, the results arrived and made her heart lurch. The prints tied not to a Mrs. Dalton at all, but to a woman named Evelyn Cross, a name buried in an old case file from 2 states away. Claire pulled the file from digital storage, her hands trembling as she read. Evelyn Cross had been investigated in connection with a child trafficking operation, one that vanished before charges could be filed. The file contained reports of missing children, forged papers, and witnesses who had seen her near safe houses. But before the case could close, Evelyn disappeared. Now she had reappeared next door, offering babysitting and slipping poison into bottles. Claire pushed the file aside and rubbed her temples. Her stomach twisted with guilt. She had let that woman near her son into her house, into their lives. If Titan hadn't reacted, if she had ignored him again, Noah would already be gone. The thought made her grip the edge of the desk so hard her knuckles went white. The door opened, and Agent Marcus Reed stepped into the office, his dark suit damp from the morning rain. He carried himself with the quiet weight of someone who had seen too much and trusted too little. Claire stood quickly, surprised, but he raised a hand. "We got the lab reports," he said, his voice low. "And we pulled the file you just accessed. You're not wrong. Dalton, Cross, whatever name she's using, she's part of a network. This isn't just about your boy." Claire's throat tightened. She targeted my son. She targeted many, Reed replied. He laid a folder on her desk. Inside were photographs of children from 3 different states, their eyes wide with fear, their faces pale on missing person posters. We believe the same group has been operating quietly for years. She's a small piece of it, but they're organized and ruthless. He looked at her with grim resolve. Dozens of children could still be at risk. Your dog saved 1 life last night, but he may have also uncovered a ring that reaches far beyond Haven Brook. Titan lifted his head then, his amber eyes steady, as though he understood the weight of what Reed had just said. Claire reached down and brushed his scarred ear. Then we stopped them, she whispered. The night was heavy with rain, the streets slick and shining beneath the glow of street lamps. When Titan caught the scent, Claire had only meant to calm him, offering Noah's small blanket for comfort after another long day of interviews and files. But the second Titan's nose brushed the fabric, he stiffened. His amber eyes flared with focus, his muscles coiling as though struck by lightning. Before Claire could speak, the shepherd lunged toward the door, blanket clutched tight in his jaws, barking once with sharp urgency. Claire grabbed her jacket and her holster, her heart pounding. She had seen that look before, the way Titan locked onto a trail during searches, his entire body consumed with purpose. She shoved her feet into her boots and yanked the leash onto his collar, but Titan barely waited. The door swung open and he surged forward, pulling her into the night. The leash cut into her palm as he dragged her down the street, his paws hammering against the wet pavement, the blanket swinging from his jaws like proof of his mission. Claire called dispatch with breathless words as she ran, telling them she was following a lead, that backup would be needed. But Titan didn't slow. He weaved through alleys, crossed streets without hesitation, nose glued to the ground as though Dalton herself had passed minutes ago. The city blurred around them, neon signs and shuttered shops slipping by until the homes thinned out and the air grew colder. Titan's pace never faltered, not once, until they reached the edge of town, where the road turned to cracked asphalt and weeds split through broken sidewalks. There, looming against the dark sky, stood a squat building with boarded windows and peeling paint. The sign above the door, faded almost to nothing, read Bright Futures Daycare. Claire felt her breath catch. The place had been closed for years. She remembered hearing something about financial troubles, but now it sat silent and waiting like a tomb. Titan growled low, tugging her toward the rusted door. Inside, the smell hit first, a sour blend of mildew and something sharper, chemical, almost metallic. Claire covered her nose with her sleeve, shining her flashlight through the gloom. The beam caught rows of cribs lined against the walls, some tipped on their sides, some still intact. Plastic bottles littered the floor, some empty, some half-filled with liquid that had long since spoiled. In the corner, she saw restraints, ropes, belts, straps, piled carelessly as though discarded tools. Her stomach turned violently and she had to steady herself against the doorframe. Titan prowled ahead, his growl rolling like thunder as he sniffed each crib, each corner, every trace left behind. His tail was rigid, his hackles high, his body screaming a warning she didn't need explained. Claire's light caught on a mural painted across one wall, once bright with cartoon animals and smiling suns, now faded and cracked. The sight of those cheerful faces twisted against the reality of the room made her skin crawl. She whispered into the dark, more to herself than to Titan. This was a staging ground. She saw it clearly. Children drugged into silence, kept in cribs, meant for safety, but used for imprisonment, prepared to vanish without a trace. Titan barked once, sharp and furious, and the sound echoed through the empty building like an accusation. Claire tightened her grip on the leash, her voice breaking. God help us. How many never made it home? The air inside the daycare office was colder than the rest of the building, a stagnant chill that made Claire's skin prickle as she stepped inside. The walls were covered with peeling wallpaper, faded stars, and moons that once must have been bright for children, but now hung like ghosts of a past life. Titan stayed close to her side, his nose low, his growl deep but steady, as if he sensed the residue of too many secrets in this room. The agents swept their flashlights across broken filing cabinets, overturned chairs, and papers scattered like snow across the floor. One of them bent down near a desk and pulled something from beneath the rubble. A small black cassette recorder, scratched but still intact. The room went quiet as the agent handed it to Claire. Her hands shook as she turned it over, the weight of it somehow heavier than it should have been. She pressed the button, and for a moment there was only static, the faint hiss of dead air. Then a voice broke through, flat and cold, stripped of humanity. "The Hayes boy is next. Secure him tomorrow night." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Claire felt her knees weaken and she gripped the edge of the desk to keep herself standing. Her vision blurred, not from tears but from the sudden rush of blood draining from her face. She had known Noah was in danger, had seen the poison bottle with her own eyes, but hearing his name spoken so plainly, like an item on a shopping list, drove the truth into her chest like a blade. This wasn't random. It wasn't chance. It was personal. Titan barked once, sharp and furious, his teeth flashing as he snapped at the empty air. The sound cut through Claire's spinning thoughts and steadied her enough to breathe. She crouched beside him, her hand clutching the thick fur at his neck, drawing strength from the heat of his body. "They want my son," she whispered, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. Titan growled again, as though in answer, as though promising he would not allow it. Agent Marcus Reed stepped forward, his face grave as he took the recorder from her and signaled the others to bag it as evidence. "This proves it," he said quietly, his tone grim but steady. "They've been watching you. They know who you are and they know where you live." He looked at Claire with a weight that made her chest ache. "This isn't just another case. You're in the center of it." Claire swallowed hard, her mind flashing through the last few weeks, every encounter with Mrs. Dalton, every smile that now seemed like a mask. She thought of Noah's laughter at the dinner table, of his small hands gripping the poison bottle, of the way Titan had knocked it away just in time. If not for him, her boy would already be gone. She straightened slowly, her grip on Titan's collar tightening. Fear pulsed through her veins, but beneath it burned something hotter, sharper, a mother's fury. They had spoken her son's name like a target, but she would not let them touch him. Titan pressed against her leg, steady and unyielding, and she knew he felt it too. The hunt had turned personal, and now the fight was theirs. The plan weighed on Claire like armor she didn't want to wear. Every instinct inside her screamed against it, but she knew there was no other way. The network had marked her boy, and until they revealed themselves, no one would be safe. The FBI set everything in motion, cameras hidden in corners, unmarked vehicles stationed on nearby streets, agents ready to move at a signal. Claire had agreed to play her part because she had no choice, but the idea of putting Noah in the middle of a trap left her stomach tight with dread. She told herself again and again that he would be safe, that she would be within reach, that Titan would never let anyone get close. Still, her hands trembled as she tucked Noah into his chair the following evening, his innocent smile making the entire operation feel unbearably cruel. Titan sat at the boy's side, his posture rigid, his ears pricked forward. He hadn't relaxed since the moment the plan was discussed, as though he understood every word. Claire had no doubt he did. She trusted his instincts more than her own, and now she watched the way he kept his body angled between Noah and the window, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths, but his eyes sharp and unblinking. Dinner began like any other night. Claire set down plates, though none of them had an appetite. Noah babbled about toys and colors, his small voice carrying through the tense silence, the sound almost too normal in a room thick with hidden microphones and nervous agents listening from blocks away. Claire forced herself to smile at him, to nod and answer, though her heart pounded with every second that passed. She kept her gun on the table beside her, hidden under a napkin, her fingers brushing the cool metal as if reassurance could be found in its weight. It happened faster than she expected. A movement flickered past the glass, so subtle it could have been the wind shifting the curtain, but Titan caught it instantly. His growl erupted from deep in his chest, low and dangerous, vibrating through the air like a warning bell. Noah froze, his fork slipping from his hand, and Claire's breath caught as she turned toward the window. The shadow moved again, deliberate this time, crossing the beam of the streetlight outside. Before she could shout, before the agents could move, Titan launched forward. The German Shepherd's body slammed into the window frame with a force that rattled the glass. His bark split the air, furious and unrelenting, teeth bared at the figure just beyond the curtain. Claire drew her weapon as the curtain was ripped aside. The outline of a man revealed, his mask glinting in the faint light. Titan lunged, snapping at the intruder through the half-opened window, his jaws clamping down on the man's arm before he could climb through. The figure screamed, thrashing, trying to break free, but Titan held fast, snarling, refusing to release. Claire rushed forward, shouting for backup into the hidden mic, her voice hard and sharp. Noah's cries filled the room, but Titan never wavered. He dragged the man halfway through the window, teeth still sunk deep, as agents stormed the front door. The snare had been sprung, and it was Titan who had yanked the mask from the shadows, proving once again that he would always be the line between danger and the child he was sworn to protect. The backyard exploded with noise and movement as Titan hurled himself through the shattered window, his body slamming into the masked intruder with the force of a storm. The man hit the ground hard, his weapon skidding across the grass, but before he could reach for it, Titan was on him, teeth sunk into his arm, growling with a fury that shook the night. Claire bolted through the door, gun raised, shouting for Noah to stay down, her voice raw with both fear and command. Then more shadows moved. Figures slipped from behind trees and the edge of the fence, armed and fast, their coordination sharp enough to send a chill through her. This wasn't a lone attacker. It was a team, organized and ready. The crack of gunfire tore through the night, sparks flashing as bullets clipped the siding of the house. Claire dropped low, returning fire, her hands steady, though her chest hammered. Titan did not flinch. He released the first man, only to spin toward the second, lunging before the attacker could raise his weapon. The German Shepherd's jaws clamped down on fabric and flesh, dragging the man to the ground with a snarl. Noah's frightened cry cut through the chaos, and Claire's blood froze. She whipped her head around and saw one of the masked figures breaking toward the back porch, reaching for her son. "Titan!" she screamed. The dog reacted instantly, his body a blur of muscle and instinct. He bounded away from his current fight, darting across the yard with bullets snapping through the air around him. He barreled into the attacker, just as the man's hand brushed Noah's shoulder, knocking him aside with bone-jarring force. Noah stumbled, but Titan swung around him like a shield, his body crouched low, his teeth flashing white in the dark. He barked so savagely that the man backed away, stumbling, firing wildly. But Titan never broke position, never let Noah slip from his protection. Claire fired again, striking one of the masked men in the leg. He collapsed with a shout, and agents from the FBI unit stormed into the yard, their shouts filling the night as floodlights snapped on. The sudden blaze of light revealed the full scene. Half a dozen men armed with pistols and knives, faces hidden, eyes cold. But they were caught off guard by the ferocity of one scarred dog and the swift response of agents who had been waiting for this very moment. Gunfire echoed across the yard, the acrid bite of smoke stinging Claire's nose. She moved with purpose, covering Noah even as Titan continued weaving through the chaos, pulling her boy toward the fence, never letting the child out of his sight. His fur bristled, his amber eyes wild, but his movements were sharp and controlled, every leap and bite measured. He latched onto another attacker's arm, dragging him to the dirt until agents could swarm him, and then whipped back to Noah's side, chest heaving, never once allowing himself to stray too far. When the last shot rang out and silence finally fell, Titan stood over Noah, blood streaking his muzzle, but his stance unbroken. Claire dropped to her knees, pulling her son into her arms, her body shaking with relief. Titan pressed against them, trembling but fierce, his tail low, his growl fading only when he was certain the danger had passed. Under the harsh floodlights, with bodies sprawled across the grass and agents cuffing the survivors, Claire realized what she already knew. Titan had not just fought tonight, he had saved her son again. And nothing in the world could ever repay that kind of devotion. The raid began just before dawn, when the first gray light pushed against the horizon and the world was still heavy with silence. Black SUVs rolled down the dirt road toward a sagging farmhouse on the edge of town, their engines low and purposeful. Agents moved quickly, weapons ready, eyes hard, the air buzzing with radio chatter and the weight of what was about to be uncovered. Claire sat in the lead vehicle, her hand resting on Titan's back, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath. The German shepherd was scarred and tired from the night before, but his eyes were sharp, his body coiled with the same purpose that had carried him through every fight. The suspects captured in the backyard ambush had cracked under questioning, spilling names and locations once they realized there was no escape. The farmhouse was their main safe house, the place where children were processed before being moved out of state. Hearing it had made Claire's blood run cold, but it also filled her with fire. This wasn't just about Noah anymore. This was about every child whose name had been whispered in the files, every parent who still waited for a knock at the door that never came. When the command was given, agents surged forward, boots pounding against gravel. The front door gave way with a crash, and chaos erupted. Shouts filled the halls, suspects scrambling, but the team was ready. Claire followed close behind, her weapon raised, Titan at her side. The dog growled low, tugging against the leash as if he knew what they would find. Room by room, the nightmare unfolded. In the kitchen were crates of baby bottles, each sealed with a white cap, each one later confirmed to be laced with the same sedative that had nearly stolen Noah. In a small office, agents spread papers across the desk, stacks of forged adoption documents, passports with children's faces and names altered, contracts that turned lives into transactions. Claire's throat tightened as she scanned the files. Some pages bore photographs of children who were already missing, their faces smiling, frozen in time. In the basement, the air was damp and suffocating. Against the walls were lined cribs, much like the abandoned daycare, only these still carried the faint warmth of recent use. Claire felt her knees weaken at the sight, fury and sorrow colliding inside her. Titan pressed close to her leg, his nose twitching, growling at the shadows as though he could sense the fear that had once filled this room. By the time the raid was over, the network's operation lay in ruins. Dozens of suspects were in custody, their files, records, and tools seized. News would later call it one of the largest trafficking busts in the region, a ring undone by a mother's determination and the loyalty of a battered dog. Standing in the doorway of the farmhouse, Claire looked down at Titan, his muzzle flecked with dust, his eyes steady on hers. "It started with you," she whispered, her voice thick. "You wouldn't let it go. You saw what I didn't." Titan leaned into her touch, tail thumping once against the floorboards. The ring had fallen, and it all began because a dog refused to ignore a bottle. Weeks passed, and Havenbrook slowly began to breathe again. The farmhouse had been emptied, the files secured, the criminals paraded into courtrooms where their masks were finally torn away. Families who had long lived in grief were given back pieces of truth, some reunited with children who had been missing for months, others left to mourn with at least the knowledge of what had happened. The town that once looked at shadows with suspicion began to look instead at the mural that now stretched across the brick wall of the Havenbrook Police Department. It was unveiled on a clear Saturday morning, the kind of day where the sky felt endless and forgiving. People gathered in the square, mothers holding children close, officers in uniform standing side by side with neighbors who had once been strangers. Claire held Noah's hand as they walked through the crowd, Titan padding beside them, his head high though his body still bore the scars of the battles he had fought. Children ran forward as the cloth was pulled down, gasping at the bright colors that now covered the wall. The mural showed Titan at his most powerful, standing guard with his chest out, his ears pricked, amber eyes burning with a protective light. At his side was Noah, smiling, his small hand resting on the dog's back. Around them were painted children, dozens of them, their faces lifted in gratitude, their bodies safe within the circle of Titan's stance. Beneath the painting were words written in bold black letters. He growled when we were silent. He saw what we could not. A hush settled over the crowd. As the words sank in, Claire felt her throat tighten, tears stinging her eyes despite the strength she tried to hold. She knelt down beside Titan, wrapping her arm around his strong shoulders, her voice low so only he could hear. You didn't just protect him, Titan. You gave every child a voice. Titan leaned against her, his tail brushing against the ground, his body warm and steady like a wall she knew would never fall. Reporters snapped photos, townspeople clapped, and children pressed flowers against the mural's base. But Claire hardly noticed. Her gaze was fixed on her partner, the dog who had turned a growl into salvation, who had carried the weight of her son's life and the lives of countless others without ever asking for anything in return. Noah tugged on her sleeve and knelt beside them too, wrapping his tiny arms around Titan's neck. My hero, he whispered, and Titan's ears twitched at the sound, his eyes closing as though the words alone were enough to heal every wound. For the first time in months, Claire let herself breathe without fear. She looked up at the mural again, the colors glowing under the sun, and knew it wasn't just paint on a wall. It was a promise, a reminder that courage could come with fur and scars, that heroes didn't always wear uniforms or badges. Sometimes they walked on four legs, carrying the weight of silence until they made the world listen. Thank you for watching this video of a dog's devotion. If you like this story, show your support with a like, and join us by subscribing for more inspiring stories like this one.